Disclaimer: this story contains mature themes intended for adult viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. I still remember the exact moment I decided to say yes. It was past midnight, rain hammering against my apartment windows like the sky itself was trying to warn me. Marcus stood in my doorway, soaked, exhausted, and carrying something heavy behind his eyes that I couldn't quite name yet. We'd been friends for 2 years. Just friends. That's what I kept telling myself, anyway. Just one night, he said. I'll be gone before you wake up. I should have said no. Every rational part of me knew that. We had rules, unspoken ones, the kind that keep friendships from combusting. But there was something different about him that night. Something he was holding back. I could feel it the way you feel a storm before it arrives, in your bones, before the clouds even gather. I stepped aside and let him in. The apartment felt smaller with him in it. It always did. Marcus had this quiet, magnetic presence, the kind that fills a room without demanding it. He smelled like rain and something warmer underneath. I handed him a towel, poured 2 glasses of wine I told myself were just polite, and we sat across from each other in the dim living room light. That's when the conversation started shifting. Not suddenly, never suddenly with Marcus. It was gradual, like water finding cracks in stone. We talked about the past, about choices, about the things we'd never said out loud because saying them would make them real. His eyes kept finding mine and holding just a second too long. My heart kept doing things I'd trained it not to do around him. And then he set down his glass, leaned forward, and said, "There's something I've never told you. Something about the night we first met. And I think, if I don't say it tonight, I never will." The rain outside got louder. Or maybe everything else just got quieter. I looked at him, really looked, and felt the ground shift beneath everything I thought I knew about us. What he said next changed everything. As from him now, in the hush of my rain-soaked apartment, that drawer was rattling. He hadn't started talking yet. He was just looking at me, the way he sometimes did when he thought I wasn't paying attention. Like he was memorizing something. It made my chest tighten in that specific, inconvenient way I hated. "Marcus." My voice came out softer than I intended. "Whatever it is, just say it." He exhaled slowly. His hands, those careful, architect's hands, wrapped around his wine glass like he needed something to hold on to. "Do you remember the night of Jordan's birthday? 3 months after we met?" I nodded. Of course I remembered. We'd ended up on his car bonnet at 2 a.m., watching the city below, talking about life and fear and what we both wanted but couldn't quite reach. "I almost told you then," he said quietly. "But you laughed at something, I don't even remember what, and you looked so free in that moment that He stopped himself. His jaw tightened. The air between us thickened with everything still unspoken. He looked up then, eyes steady, certain, like a man who had finally decided to stop being careful. "Zara. I think I've been in love with you for a very long time." The wine glass slipped from my fingers. Time does something strange when a confession lands. It doesn't stop, it stretches. Every second after Marcus said those words felt like it had extra room inside it. Room for every coffee we'd shared, every late-night call, every moment I'd caught myself thinking about him and immediately looked away from the thought like it was a flame too close to skin. The wine glass hadn't shattered. It had landed softly on the rug between us, almost gently, like even gravity was trying not to make this harder. I stared at it instead of him. Cowardly, maybe. But looking at Marcus right then felt like looking directly into something I'd spent 2 years building walls against. "Say something," he said quietly. "I'm trying to." The truth was, I wasn't just processing his confession. I was dismantling mine. Because here was what I had never said out loud to anyone, not even my best friend Dominique, who noticed everything. I had ended a relationship 8 months ago partly because of Marcus. Not because anything had happened between us. Nothing had. But because David, kind, patient David, had looked at me one evening and said, "You light up differently when you talk about him." And I hadn't been able to deny it convincingly enough. I had told myself it was nothing. Proximity. Comfort. The kind of emotional dependency that masquerades as friendship when loneliness is involved. But loneliness doesn't make your hands tremble the way mine were trembling now. Marcus moved, not dramatically, just shifted forward slightly, closing the invisible boundary we'd maintained so carefully for so long. Close enough that I could see the uncertainty still flickering behind his eyes. He wasn't performing confidence. He was terrified. And somehow that made it worse, because an arrogant man I could have dismissed. A vulnerable one was impossible. I'm not saying this to complicate things, he said, voice low and steady. I'm saying it because keeping it in has been. He pressed his lips together. It's been exhausting, Zara. Watching you date people who never quite. He stopped again, catching himself. Never quite what? I whispered. His eyes dropped to my mouth for just a fraction of a second. Just one fraction. But I felt it everywhere. Never quite saw you the way I do, he finally finished. The rain outside had slowed to a whisper. The candle on the table had burned lower. And I was running out of reasons to keep the wall standing, and out of the courage to let it fall. My phone buzzed on the cushion beside me. I glanced down instinctively. It was a message from David. David's message read, I've been thinking about us. Can we talk? 2 months of silence and he chose tonight, I turned the phone face down without responding. Some conversations deserved better timing, and some doors, once you'd walked far enough away from them, deserved to stay closed. Whatever David wanted to revisit, it belonged to a version of me that existed before this moment. Before Marcus was sitting close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating off him like something I'd been cold without for a very long time. Everything okay? Marcus asked. It's nothing. He didn't push. He never pushed. That was the thing about him. He gave space the way other people gave pressure, and somehow that made him harder to resist than anyone who had ever tried harder. I set the phone aside and looked at him fully for the first time since his confession. It was a mistake. The best kind. Because Marcus was looking back, openly now, no more careful editing, no more diplomatic distance. Just him, all of him, focused entirely on me with an intensity that made the room feel like it had shrunk to only the two of us and the small, charged space between us. I need to ask you something, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Anything. That night on Jordan's birthday. On your car. When I laughed, I swallowed. What were you going to say? Something moved across his face. Slow and certain, like sunrise. He reached out, and with the kind of deliberate gentleness that ruins people, tucked a single curl behind my ear. His fingertips barely grazed my jaw. Barely. But my entire nervous system registered it like a full sentence. I was going to say you were the most effortlessly beautiful thing I'd ever seen, he murmured. And that I was already in serious trouble. The last inch of distance between us felt almost aggressive now, like it was the only thing left with any willpower in the room. My hand, completely without my permission, found the fabric of his sleeve. His breath shifted. Zara. The way he said my name, low, deliberate, like a question and an answer at once, dissolved the last coherent argument my brain was trying to assemble. I tilted my face upward. He leaned in. And the candle on the table, as if it had been waiting, went out. The darkness lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then the city outside pulsed with a distant streak of lightning and the room breathed back into dim, silver-blue existence, and Marcus and I were still there, still close, still suspended in that terrifying, exhilarating space between what was and what could be. Neither of us had moved. Neither of us had spoken. His forehead dropped slowly, almost involuntarily, until it rested against mine. Just that. Just foreheads touching in the dark like two people who had been carrying something heavy for far too long and had finally, quietly, set it down. I felt his exhale against my lips. Tell me to stop, he whispered. And I will. No questions. Nothing changes. The most dangerous part wasn't the closeness. It was that I genuinely couldn't remember a single reason to say it. My fingers, still wrapped in his sleeve, tightened instinctively. And that small, involuntary movement said everything my voice hadn't. His hand came up slowly, cupping the side of my face like I was something worth being careful with, thumb tracing my cheekbone with a tenderness so quiet and deliberate it made my throat tighten. I had been touched before. I had been wanted before. But I had never been handled like I mattered at this precise, specific level, and the difference was devastating. Then my front door buzzed. We broke apart like people caught in something, even though we'd barely begun. I stared at him. He stared at me. The buzzer rang again, sharp, impatient, cutting through the rain and the silence and the moment like something sent specifically to destroy it. "Are you expecting anyone?" Marcus asked, voice rough. "No," I breathed. I crossed to the intercom on unsteady legs, pressed the button with a hand that wasn't quite steady. "Who is it?" A pause. Rain static. Then. "Zara." "It's me." A voice I recognized immediately. One that had no business being outside my building at midnight in a rainstorm. My ex-boyfriend David. Not calling. Not texting. Here. I turned slowly and looked at Marcus still sitting in the dim blue light of my living room, hair slightly disheveled, eyes watching me with an expression balanced precisely between understanding and something rawer underneath it. He had heard. The intercom was not quiet. The silence between us collapsed into something complicated. "You should answer it," he said carefully. Controlled. But his jaw was tight in the way it got when Marcus was feeling something he'd decided not to show. "Marcus. He came here, Zara. In the rain." A quiet pause. That means something. But here was the thing Marcus didn't know, the thing I hadn't told anyone. The real reason David and I had ended wasn't distance or timing or incompatibility. It was a secret David had been keeping for 11 months. One I had accidentally discovered. One that had broken something in me so quietly that I'd spent 8 months convincing myself I was completely fine. My finger hovered over the door release button. Behind me, Marcus stood up slowly. And I realized, heart hammering, mind fracturing cleanly in 2 directions, that whatever I did in the next 10 seconds was going to define everything that came after. Both men. Both truths. Both versions of my future. Waiting that I pressed the intercom button. "David. Go home." A long pause. Rain filling the silence. "Zara, please. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." My forehead fell against the wall beside the intercom. 5 minutes. That's what he'd said 11 months ago when I'd confronted him about what I'd found, a series of messages on his laptop, left carelessly open, between him and a woman I'd met twice at work dinners. Warm messages. Intimate messages. The kind that rewrote every memory of the previous year in a single sitting. He'd asked for 5 minutes then too. I'd given him 45 and walked out anyway. "There's nothing left to say," I said quietly into the intercom. "I mean that kindly. Please go." Silence. Then the soft sound of retreating footsteps through the static. I stood at the wall for a moment longer than necessary, not for David, but for myself. For the version of me that had needed those 8 months to quietly rebuild. I honored her briefly, then straightened, turned around, and stopped. Marcus was standing directly behind me. Not hovering. Not crowding. Just present. Close. His expression stripped of everything performative, carrying only something genuine and unguarded that I hadn't seen on anyone's face in a very long time. "You knew about her," he said softly. Not a question. For 8 months. Something shifted in his eyes. "You never told me." "I didn't tell anyone." He exhaled slowly, and then, with the same quiet deliberateness that defined everything he did, he pulled me into his chest and simply held me. No agenda. No escalation. Just arms around me in the dark, his chin resting against my hair, his heartbeat steady against my cheek like a metronome for something I'd forgotten how to feel. Safe. I had been so busy being fine that I'd forgotten what this felt like. I felt something loosen in my chest. Something that had been braced for a long time. "Marcus," I murmured into his shoulder. "Still here," he said simply. And those two quiet words, undid me more completely than any grand gesture ever could have. I pulled back just enough to look at him. He looked back with that same open, unhurried certainty. I leaned up. He leaned down. And this time, nothing interrupted us. But as his lips met mine, warm, certain, achingly gentle, my phone screen lit up on the sofa behind us. A notification from an unknown number. 4 words. "I know about Marcus." We didn't look at the phone that night. That was a conscious decision, the first one we made together. Marcus saw my eyes flicker toward the glowing screen and gently, wordlessly, reached over and turned it face down. Then he looked at me with an expression that said, "Whatever that is, it can wait until morning." And for the first time in years, I chose the present moment over the anxiety of what was coming next. We talked until 4 a.m. Not about the message. Not about David. Not about the unnamed person who apparently knew something about Marcus worth using as a threat. We talked about everything we'd been carefully not saying for 2 years, the small confessions, the quiet memories, the moments we'd each privately replayed and never mentioned. It was the most honest conversation I'd had with another human being in longer than I could measure. Somewhere around 3 a.m., I made tea. Marcus sat on the kitchen counter while I waited for the kettle, something he'd done a dozen times before, except this time his hand found mine and stayed there. Comfortable. Certain. Like it had always belonged. In the weeks that followed, the unknown message was traced back to someone from Marcus's past, a former colleague with a complicated history and a talent for assumptions. It amounted to nothing. Some threats, I learned, are loud precisely because they have no real power. David never came back. I think, finally, he understood. "Dominique, my best friend who had noticed everything, said simply, 'Took you too long enough,' when I told her." Then she hugged me for a full minute without letting go. What I know now that I didn't know that rainy midnight is this: real intimacy isn't the moment things ignite. It's every quiet, unglamorous moment after. It's tea at 3 a.m. and someone sitting on your kitchen counter like they've always lived in your space. It's being held without being fixed. It's the courage of 2 people deciding that something real is worth the risk of losing the comfortable version. Marcus still says I think too much. I tell him he doesn't say enough. We're both still right. And on rainy nights especially, when the city hums low outside the windows and the apartment glows warm against the dark, I think about a soaked man in my doorway, a candle that burned out, and the night I almost said no to everything I actually needed. I'm glad I stepped aside. I'm glad I let him in.